Estás viendo la versión para YouTube de Sí, el podcast de Somos Innovación. Acompáñanos a explorar cómo a través de soluciones innovadoras los latinoamericanos vamos a mejorar nuestras vidas. El futuro llama.
Hola, soy Federico Fernández. Bienvenidos a un nuevo episodio de Sí, el podcast de Somos Innovación. Hoy vamos a tener una conversación, aviso que en inglés, con James Sproule. Vamos a charlar específicamente de una propuesta de James para el Reino Unido, para que el Reino Unido cree una ciudadanía electrónica y negocios electrónicos. James es actualmente economista jefe del Handelsbanken en Londres. En el pasado se desempeñó como asesor económico senior del primer ministro Boris Johnson y también ha trabajado en varios think tanks británicos. Es autor del informe Going Global, How to Make the UK the Champion of Worldwide Entrepreneurship, publicado por el Center for Policy Studies, CPS. En redes pueden encontrarlo en LinkedIn y en su web personal, sproule.org. A todo, incluido el reporte, voy a poner los links en las notas del episodio. James, welcome to C.
Thank you very much. Very good to see you again.
It's great seeing you and it's great having you. Thank you for your time. And before, starting with your proposal, with the great report you've recently published, I wanted to ask you what's your view about what, because you're heavily influenced, about what's going on in what has been going on in the last 5 years in Estonia. How do you see that?
I think what Estonia did has been absolutely brilliant. I mean, their economy as a whole has been phenomenally successful. We look at all the post-Soviet economies, parts of the Soviet Union, the Baltic states in general, and Estonia in particular, are the standard candidates for governments which have been able to deliver prosperity to their citizens. And they've done that really through essentially attaching themselves to the wider Nordic region. I mean, it was an obvious thing to have done, but often obvious things don't get done. So I think that they've embraced the way in which the Nordics are extraordinarily good at a lot of technology. There's been a real pattern. At one point, obviously, Nokia was an extraordinarily important company. It's since fallen on hard times. But the important thing is that that the industry itself, that the expertise that was built up remained in that area. The degree of entrepreneurialism is very, very high in that part of the world. That appealed immensely to, I think, a lot of Estonians. And then Estonia decided to try and take that to a broader audience. And I think that in the way of any plan, that sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't work in quite the way you expected it. If we look at Estonia, expected a lot of people in other parts of the former Soviet Union to take advantage of Estonian e-citizenship. Unfortunately, it seems that significant numbers of people who were entrepreneurial in Russia decided the first thing they needed to do was to seek another place to set up their company, full stop, so that Russian levels of entrepreneurialism are still extremely low. But a lot of Russian entrepreneurs have gone to other places, some to the Nordics, obviously some to the United States and places like that as well. So I don't think it worked quite in the way that they expected it, but then there's been more interest internationally in the program than Estonia would have anticipated. And this is ultimately, Estonia, I've unfortunately only been there once myself, but it's a very small country. It's a couple of million population. And so whilst it's a great idea for Estonia, I think it could be even better idea if we brought it back to the UK, or if we took the elements of that idea and modified them a bit and brought them into the UK, where I think we would make it even more of an impact.
Yeah, indeed. In your report, and I quote, you write, if e-residency was a natural fit with Estonia's digital-first culture of government, an e-citizenship program is an even better fit for Britain. So yes. Why do you think that, and what's the e-citizenship program?
Well, I think what e-citizenship does is it acknowledges a couple of things. First of all, that there's been an explosion in entrepreneurship around the world. And I think this is one of the really, really positive things. And I think it's particularly important to focus on it now, both because it is happening now, but also because, frankly, there's so much bad news in the market and so much bad news in the world that we're looking at. We're all trying to cope with COVID. We're all trying to cope with the aftermath of COVID. But we have to appreciate we still live in a time of great opportunity. If we look at the data that comes out of the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, which is run by about 25 universities around the world, and that shows that in 2001, when they started gathering the data, not many countries even had data measurable about entrepreneurship, but even still what you were looking at, so for a country like the UK, about 6% of the population was on entrepreneur. Today, that's about 12%. For the US in 2001, it was about 12%. Today, it's about 18%. That's people working for new startup companies. So I think that that's the sort of dynamism that is going to mean your economy meets the challenges going forward. It means that business looks for new opportunities, because that's an entrepreneurship undoubtedly does that. It's not obviously limited to entrepreneurs, because you can get people within companies taking on new responsibilities and looking for new opportunities, but it shows the kind of dynamic opportunity that's there. The problem is that around the world, there's way too many governments where that's very, very difficult for that entrepreneur to establish the credibility, to be able to look overseas to other markets, maybe even just the neighboring countries. But people say, well, how can I trust you? How can you have bank accounts that are trustworthy? What sort of rule of law should we use? And then we can see in this e-citizenship program a way in which the UK can help all these people, because it can say to the entrepreneur in Kenya, if you want to be trading with people in Tanzania, in Nigeria, in the UK, in the United States, all of a sudden you can have the corporate governance of the UK, which is very credible, the legal status with the UK. You could have bank accounts with widely recognized banks here in London. You'll have a special account, an e-citizenship account, and you can become a much more trusted counterparty for all these people. So you're giving the entrepreneurs in the rest of the world the opportunity to really branch into becoming credible traders, credible parts of the globalizing world. So I think globalization is going to change as a result of COVID, but I don't think it's going to stop. It's just going to metamorphosize, and that's what really we're able to do with this issue.
This idea of yours would be basically, let's say, to make the very high standards of rule of law that the UK has to other people in the world.
Absolutely, that's exactly it. And so a person would have to establish their e-citizenship credentials. They would be, just as in Estonia, you would actually have a card, an e-citizenship card, and it's what they call a zero proof, which is to say, one of the problems that many people have, particularly in markets in which, or countries in which there might be a lot of doubt. Who are you? How are you going to establish who you are? This would be the electronic version of saying you are absolutely who you are. Federico Fernández, it's you. It's a biometric card. It can't be transferred to somebody else. You establish, I am trustworthy. This is me. And therefore, when you're accessing the bank accounts, when you're accessing, when you're electronically signing legal documents, it's absolutely certain that's you. So you're able to give people a degree of proof and a reassurance. And so e-citizenship both allows the person to establish themselves and then allows them to start a company, an e-company as well, to say, okay, I am this person who's trading or who's manufacturing or whatever else. So you might have a company who's engaged in light manufacturing, or a farmer who's engaged in the exportation of, here in the UK, we get a lot of, for instance, in the winter, we get a lot of crops from East Africa, sort of beans and things. Okay, well, that farmer could establish themselves as a trader. So you pay the money into their overseas bank account, e-bank account, so they know, and it could be in sterling or something like that. The tax liability clearly remains, and they would have to pay tax, and the reporting instructions would go down to their national tax authority. So we're very, very aware that we need to be, that the people using the system have to realize this is about being honest as a trader. This is not a money laundering issue. This is not something where you're going to be able to avoid tax at all. It's all going to be reported. It's going to be completely above board. But that said, what you will get is, of course, that trust. And that will be very, very valuable. And one of the other aspects I looked at in all of this is because, of course, if you're starting as an entrepreneur, after you've established who you are, after you've established your company, in many cases, you're going to quickly come onto the idea of, how do I get some money? And so venture capital firms would be, I think, could be tempted into looking at this program and saying, these people have gone through the stage of proving who they are, proving they've got an investable idea. At least we can start to look at it. And we in the UK have a number of programs for startup companies. It wouldn't actually need very much money in many cases, but for instance, if you're looking at a lot of the crowdfunding, etc., those sorts of things could be started, but they would have, for the crowdfunder, for the potential investors, you've got that much more certainty as to who you're investing in, what the companies are, show me what your business plan is, and you could start to get people to do that as well. So at the moment, I would think that most crowdfunding would stop because the risks are simply too high to go into that. You don't know the people, they've not proven themselves. You don't know whether if you invest some money, they're just going to disappear with it. Now, the money still might be lost, of course, because it's a high risk investment. But the fact is, it's not going to be lost because the person is corrupt. It's just, unfortunately, bad business. They run into problems, which...
I want to come back in a minute of several things that you mentioned, because you talked about several key issues of your proposal. But before that, a couple of, let's say, more technical questions. The first one that comes to mind, and you mentioned this in your report, is the issue of, is the digital infrastructure in the UK, let's say, ready for something like this? Because Estonia is a peculiar case in a way. They started this since they regained independence from the Soviet Union in the 1990s. It's a small country, as you mentioned. So let's say, of course, the UK is a highly developed country, but this would need really a very sophisticated infrastructure to work. How do you see that?
Yeah, no, that is one of the we looked at the sophistication of the IT systems necessary for that, and obviously needs to build in an enormous amount of anti-fraud as well into the whole program. There is a system in the UK called gov.uk, which citizens here can access, and you can do everything from your income tax to paying for your road registration, and there's a lot of things. I didn't go into making a recommendation as to whether they should build a standalone system or whether they should build something that goes alongside the existing systems within the UK. I think that would have to be investigated as part of how we're going to put this all together. But I completely agree with you that this is something that needs to be considered carefully. I did point out that one of the things that for those who say, even if it is very successful, are there are enough literate people that are going to be able to access all of that. I pointed out the Anbar system in India, which has registered millions and millions of Indians who were previously unregistered altogether. So I don't think that this is impossible. If the Indians are able to do it across their entire society, we're dealing with something here which is going to be not hundreds of millions, but if it were wildly successful, a few tens of millions would be the most I would ever see signing up to a program like this. So I think that there are IT systems out there that can handle all of this reasonably well.
In Estonia, you mentioned in your report that basically 10,000 companies more or less have been opened, and 60,000 something e-residencies have been granted, something like that. Yeah, so I mean, the UK probably as a jurisdiction is more interesting, but yeah, we're not talking about 2 billion people that will need.
And the Estonians did, the initial estimates were for more people from Estonia, largely because they thought a lot of Russians and Ukrainians were going to join, Belarusians were going to join, and that didn't happen. But what they've been surprised about was the appeal that it's had to entrepreneurs in a much wider range of countries. So they've got a lower number, but a wider range. I think that the credibility of the UK is just that much more. The ability of, one of the support mechanisms of this is going to be the UK, the Foreign Office, because people will have to apply for this. They will, when establishing it, they would have to go to United Kingdom embassies and high commissions to, this is who I am, here's my ID, and then pay their fee and then be issued with the card, which sort of is the introductory passport onto the system. And obviously the UK has a much broader reach globally than Estonia does. It's not trying to be in any way critical of Estonia. I think they're a great place and it's a great idea, but we are just a bigger country with a much larger diplomatic footprint to help all of that. So I think that's the UK will be that much more popular just because of our size and historic scope.
And as you presented in this, I would like to know if I understood correctly. As you presented, as you see it, if this program were to be implemented, do you see also the e-citizenship of the UK as, let's say, a first step for some people, at least, in order to migrate to the UK, to like as a pre-screening, or they could get some points at least in order to do that if they would like to?
We make this very, very clear that I think there's two things here. One is at the moment, and the e-citizenship is the same thing in Estonia. This does not give permission to come to the UK, does not give permission to any recourse to the UK taxpayer, etc. That said, e-citizenship would have a fairly high standard in terms of proving who you are, proving that you've got a bona fide business, etc. And if you were a businessman and businesswoman and you wanted to come to the UK, you would have to fill out a form and you'd have to prove who you are. And given the standard of e-citizenship is higher than the standard that would need it just to fill in a business visa, this could be used as your pre-application form for the business visa. So it would reduce the paperwork. If they had said, I'd like to come to the UK because I've got some meetings with various people and potential, and you were an Argentinian, and they'd say, well, fill in this application form. You say, well, I've already got e-citizenship. You're straight through. So that's the first stage. We then said that the UK does have this points-based program to come to the UK right now. A lot of people have thought that Brexit's all about shutting off immigration. It's not at all. It's about controlling the immigration. And particularly, the UK remains very, very keen on people who are entrepreneurial. And so our suggestion is that there's a number of issues which you can score points on if you have a degree, if you speak the English language, and various other things. We said that this should be some points towards that. It wouldn't be anything like enough alone to come to the UK, but it would help your application process. And it might be timed so that if you couldn't just apply for e-citizenship and then immediately get the points, you might have to have applied for it. And after a number of years, say, well, you've been in e-citizenship for 3 or 4 years, here's 10 points towards your migration package. So it wouldn't be giving you the automatic entitlement, but it would be showing that you had a degree of loyalty to the UK, and also that in time, it would be helping you both immediately with your business visa, but in time, it might be helping you if you didn't choose to migrate. But I think that's a desirable part of the program, but I don't think it's the whole program by any means.
You mentioned entrepreneurial people, and I'll go back again to read just a quick line from your report. You write, what many entrepreneurial minds around the world naturally turn to over time is the ambition and desire to look beyond local markets. And it is here that establishing a UK e-businesses could be a natural next step. Let's suppose I got the e-citizenship. What's this e-business idea? Why is it the natural next step, and how would it work?
Well, because you're Argentinian and you got e-citizenship and you think, I would like to trade with Brazil, but I don't have a Argentinian bank account, and I'm a bit nervous of what might be happening there. Maybe some historic reasons that come to mind. And you could say, well, I can establish a contract with this company using English law, very, very well understood. There could be things like we could put in draft contracts, so standard contracts for minor amounts, but literally you could put a PDF in there or a file in there saying, here's it, your name, your company's name, your name, and then so that it becomes a very, very basic contract. Okay, you've now signed, both sides have signed this thing. There's some piece of paper that shows what goods or services you're going to be delivering, what payments you're expecting. So you've now got a legal contract and you've got a bank account for them to pay the money into. So all of that becomes much, much easier to do that. And it allows you as an entrepreneur, and in many ways, as the smaller the market, the more that people are thinking globally or thinking in terms of trading in their region, the more valuable this becomes. So now they've got an easy way to build their business up, to be able to service customers in other countries. And that's, we've seen that, and one of the things we talk about a lot is we want to raise this initially at the Commonwealth, and not because we don't want other countries to do it as well, but because Commonwealth often has English law or basis of English law. And we also know that if we look around the world, there's a number of Commonwealth countries which are extraordinarily entrepreneurial. If you look at the most entrepreneurial countries in the world are Zambia and Nigeria, both obviously in the Commonwealth, where you have almost 40% of the population claiming to be entrepreneurs. Now, I think a lot of these people are small one-man shops, one-woman shops, and you could argue if you weren't an entrepreneur in those places, you probably didn't have a job at all. That said, there are a lot of people there with a lot of ambition, and I think that we're offering people with ambition a way to meet those ambitions moving forward. And that's a really, really valuable thing. Even if it doesn't work out for them, we're giving them a chance, and it's just helping them to grow their business and say, you are a trustworthy, credible person. You're going to learn about what is good corporate governance all about. And if we look at what are the things that really drive prosperity in the longer term, one of the key things is companies that are trustworthy, systems which work, the rule of law becomes an extraordinarily important thing to getting people to sort of escape from poverty and move into prosperity. And if the UK can play part of that, if the UK can help people by lending our credibility and to those who are trustworthy, isn't that a good thing?
Indeed. And now I would like to ask you maybe of something that is not such a good thing, which has to do with taxation. You write on the report that being a UK e-businesses would not be a substitute for registering a company locally. How would this exactly work, and how would you think taxation issues should be managed for e-businesses?
Well, it is obviously a complicated issue, as you point out, and there are undoubtedly far too complex tax systems around the world. And I don't think that if we said, I clearly would not be saying this, but if we had approached it from the point of view of, you pay taxes into the UK and the UK will remit the taxes to this country, we clearly cannot have this being a tax avoidance system. That's not its design at all. And therefore, what we're really after is we want the countries involved to be cooperative with this. And if they see it as being a tax avoidance system, I completely understand why they wouldn't want to be cooperative. And that's, as I say, not the intention. I don't think it's the intention of Estonian e-citizenship either. I think they ran into exactly the same issue, and they took exactly the same approach. So we are saying to the Kenyan government, if you've got a Kenyan entrepreneur, they've established this business, they're doing some business in the UK, here's the business they're doing. And we know the bank account's going to be reported to them. So they're going to see very directly, here's what's going on. And it's obviously taxes around the world are very, very complex. And different countries have different rules, and the entrepreneur is going to have to obey the rules of their local country. That's going to be the only way that's going to be acceptable to countries. If I said I'm picking on the Kenyans, but I'm only meaning in a good way. If I'm saying to the Kenyan government, your citizens are becoming a British citizenship, but it's not affecting their Kenyan citizenship. It's not affecting the amount of money that the tax they're going to be paying. It's just facilitating their ability to trade. Well, then it's not a threat to them. It's just an opportunity for their people.
And as you see it, let's say every e-business will be anchored in like a business somewhere else. It's not that it will be a creation out of nothing. Is that correct?
I would see that you would establish an e-business. I cannot see that the business would exist solely in terms of that, but that's, I suppose, something that could be considered in time. But would you become an e-citizenship and establish the e-business and not have an actual business on the ground in your home country? but potentially, I suppose you could, but I don't see that being the case initially. I'm not. I wasn't in the report advocating either approach. I mean, if it did happen, I would think most times you would want to have that locally established business, if only because you would be, as in your previous question, paying tax, and that will require you to be having established that business. But I suppose for that reason alone, there would have to be a locally established business, even if almost all of the commerce that business undertook did end up being online. If that were the case, maybe you do have a local business in which entire revenues were generated through an electronic basis, fine, but you still have to have a parent at home where you draw through the tax implications.
One of the things that I think you really hit, let's say, the nail in the head, is that you are very explicit in your report. You mentioned it before, but sorry, I wanted to come back because I think this is probably the Achilles heel of what's going on in Estonia, that an e-citizen and an e-business should be able to open a British bank account. And that is something that has not been working very well in Estonia. And for some, it's fine. They can find, digital banks and other alternatives. But for certain particular businesses, it's a total no-go not to have a bank account in the country where the company is located.
Yeah, I mean, we did debate when I was writing and consulting with people when I was putting this report together, and we did discuss this at some length. I think that the ability to have that bank account, and we can have them quite clearly sectioned off from mainstream British bank accounts. We're not talking about being able to do that, but there's a number of banks based in the UK that have had a long overseas history, and it doesn't strike me as being impossible for those banks to establish a separate operating unit which would offer banking facilities to these companies. I think it's a longer term, quite a good thing to establish those relationships, and it offers UK-based banks an opportunity to really push down into the entrepreneurial side of a lot of really quite exciting emerging markets. And so, whether it's one of the big UK banks or one of the more one of the new startup banks that the government's trying to encourage, doesn't really matter. It would be undoubtedly a separate part of that bank, but it does give those banks, I think, quite a good commercial opportunity to look and say, would we like to be part of the exciting growing market? And if you look at the world as a whole, I am, as I was saying at the outset, very excited by the world that we live in terms of the opportunities that we have and the opportunities being created by entrepreneurialism and by technology, and the way in which I think that increasingly we're going to see value driven by intellectual as opposed to the basic manufacturing elements. They'll still be valuable, but they won't be as much of the value adding as some other parts. Wouldn't it be a good idea to give yourself the opportunity to be part of that? And I think that there's, whether that be as an investor, whether that be as a bank providing services, or whether it be, frankly, as a law firm providing services, Britain does very well at providing good global services, and this is an opportunity for British firms to provide those good global services, and clearly financial services are an important element of that.
Yeah, you touched what I wanted to ask you now, which is, what are, let's say, the advantages that you see for British citizens, for British companies with such an idea implemented?
Yeah, and I think that there's both the advantage to where are we going to invest in the longer term. British citizens, in terms of they're pretty good about investing in things, and the government's put together a number of longer term programs which have been very, very popular for investors, largely aimed domestically, but I think that can be expanded. But I think the big advantage is really to British services firms, where it wouldn't stop other, for instance, European law firms offering this as well, European financial services firms from offering, but they would do it through their UK subsidiaries. But it's really playing to Britain's strengths, saying we have an enormous expertise in English law, obviously, which is far and away the most popular legal structure in the world. We have lots of experience with financing, lots of experience with consultancy services. There are great ways that British firms could help these companies. And as they grow, it's going to be more and more, they're going to see the sort of the real growth champions of the next generation are going to be coming from surprising places around the world. And let's help some of those companies grow, and let's be an integral part of their long-term plans. And I think that's hugely the benefit of the UK, to be playing that global perspective.
You start your report mentioning, let's say, we are going through, hopefully coming out from a global pandemic, and that has affected to a certain extent, we don't know how much, let's say the status of globalization. How do you see the health of globalization, and how do you think we should proceed thinking and moving forward?
Well, I think that the pandemic has really had three concurrent shocks to the economy. The first one was the supply shock, and then we had the demand shock because so many countries have shut down and stopped consumers from spending. That's been a big shock. And then we have the shock, which really hasn't been felt in full yet, which is about asset valuations and the stretched asset valuations, which if you had asked me last autumn, I would have said is a big issue, but then other things have come to the fore. But looking at that first element, I think there was a surprise around the world as to how much dependence that we had in how many different areas on China. Many, many businesses around the world had built up supply chains which were very, very dependent upon China, and China had been, frankly, extremely good at both manufacturing at low cost, and then critically also having a very, very good logistical element in terms of getting the stuff out. So if you were producing a pharmaceutical in China, not only did they produce the pharmaceutical at a very, very low cost, they had the ability to put it into a truck, get the truck to a port, get the container onto a ship, and get the ship out to wherever you were. That sounds all relatively straightforward and simple, and it is until you try and do it somewhere else, in which case you realize the Chinese have, frankly, organized themselves extremely effectively. That said, there is now an enormous desire to diversify one's supply chains. Now, some people are talking, and the US presidential elections is coming up, does Joe Biden, does Donald Trump want to encourage more reshoring, as it's called, moving production facilities back into, for instance, the United States, or maybe people moving back within Europe? I think there's two things to keep in mind here. One is that a reasonable amount of that has been going on for some time anyway. My own career, for a number of years, when I was at Accenture, we did exactly that. So that's not a new trend. It's just really an acceleration of that trend. And also, it has to be borne in mind that when manufacturing or whatever else is reshored, it doesn't tend to bring very many jobs with it, because the reshoring facilities invariably are the state of the art, which means they use as few people as possible. So this is not going to be a boost to employment anywhere. I think, though, that the way the globalization is changing is that it's going to be much, much more about the exchange of ideas. It's going to be about the exchange of data. It's going to be an intellectual as opposed to a physical manufacturing. So we're seeing people being essentially engineered out of enormous amounts of manufacturing and engineering. And that's, in many ways, fine, because that's the demands that we as consumers make upon the people who are producing the stuff. So I think that the way in which it's going to go and the way in which people want to exchange ideas, that's critical. And again, if you're selling services or if you're engaging in this, can I trust you becomes a really key element. I will consider using you as a design consultant in Argentina, but can I trust you? Who are you? You've put an interesting bid together, but I don't know who you are. Oh, but you got this British e-citizenship. So you've gone through, the British government has given you a stamp of approval, said you are a trustworthy company, you have banking facilities I recognize, you're signing a contract in English law. All of these things give greater assurance of who the counterparty is, and therefore allow you to be part of that information flow, part of that new globalizing world.
James, I will be speaking with you the whole day, but I know, you have other things to do, and I really appreciate your time. But before, letting you go and thanking you again for being with us today, I wanted to ask you your impressions, and I know this is a very wide question, but your impressions of post-Brexit Britain. It seems that the world hasn't ended, at least not for the UK. And if you see Brexit as a possibility to improve in free trade, and also as this post-Brexit UK can become, let's say, a push factor for the rest of Europe in order to do the right things regarding trade, spending, and economics in general?
Well, Brexit's clearly come as a shock to many people. I think that when we were having the debate in the UK and people were saying, what does Brexit mean? I think that what they were missing in that was that Brexit can mean, in many ways, what you want it to mean. And for those people who are not happy with the whole issue, well, it's really up to you to define it so that you can define it in ways that make it work for you. I think that what I want the UK to be is that global, outward-looking country that it's always been when it's been successful. And I think that is certainly an option. There are many other options out there, because any country can make bad turnings or frankly, many countries in the world aren't as successful as they might be. But I want Britain to be absolutely as successful. And that does mean really looking out into the world and saying, how can we help these people? There are obviously lots of debates within the European Union full stop as to how we're going to both deal with Britain, but how are we going to get that prosperity program going within Europe itself? That's obviously now for the European Union to promote and to sort out. I hope they come to a deal with the UK, but even more importantly, I hope they come to, they find a way to make sure that they're prosperous. But the UK, what we're looking to do, and what I would like the government to do, is to make sure that the UK is helping others to be prosperous, and that is one of the best ways of ensuring our own long-term prosperity. And this is an element in that whole debate.
Thank you very much for your time again, James. And I'll switch to Spanish just to close the episode. A todos los que nos escucharon, muchísimas gracias. No olviden suscribirse a través de cualquier plataforma que utilicen para escuchar podcasts. También se pueden suscribir a través de nuestro canal de YouTube y los esperamos en un nuevo episodio de Sí, el podcast de Somos Innovación.
Sí es el podcast de Somos Innovación. Visita SomosInnovacion.lat para suscribirte. Y no olvides compartir este episodio a través de tus redes.